The red and blue strobe lights sliced violently through the midnight fog, painting the deserted highway in a sinister glow. Officer Vance Harlan smirked as he adjusted his heavy-duty belt. As he stepped out of his cruiser, he was utterly convinced this was just another routine stop, another black man driving a luxury vehicle he silently deemed too expensive for him to afford. Harlan expected the usual script: nervous compliance, stammered apologies, or a flash of fear he could instantly weaponize. Instead, he met the cold, unyielding stare of a man who held Harlan's entire career, pension, and freedom in his tailored pocket. Within moments, the officer's deep-seated arrogance would crumble into unadulterated panic. The dashboard clock of the charcoal-gray Mercedes-Benz S-Class glowed softly. Victor Kane rubbed his tired eyes, feeling the heavy toll of a long, grueling day settling into the marrow of his bones. Outside, a light, freezing drizzle had begun to fall over the quiet streets of Oak Ridge, an affluent, tightly knit enclave on the outskirts of the city. The rhythmic, hypnotic swish of the windshield wipers was the only sound inside the insulated cabin, save for the low volume of a jazz station playing softly on the radio. Victor just wanted to get home, take off his tie, and pour a glass of bourbon. He had noticed the headlights tailing him for some distance. At first, the police cruiser had kept its distance, a shadowy predator lingering just at the edge of his rearview mirror. Victor was a careful driver. He had not exceeded the speed limit. He had used his turn signals at every deserted intersection, and he had come to a complete halt at every stop sign. Yet the cruiser remained, mirroring his every turn. Victor's jaw tightened. At 52 years old, despite his impeccable suits and a lifetime of towering professional achievements, he knew the unspoken rules of the road. He knew the script. As he signaled to turn onto Elmwood Drive, a mere few blocks from his driveway, the inevitable happened. The cruiser's light bar erupted in a blinding strobe of red and blue, cutting through the dark, misty night. The sharp mechanical chirp of the siren ordered him to pull over. Victor let out a slow, measured breath. He did not panic. He guided the heavy sedan smoothly to the shoulder, parking beneath the harsh yellow glow of a street lamp. He shifted the car into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down the driver's side window. He then placed both hands firmly at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel, right where they could be clearly seen. In the side mirror, he watched the doors of the cruiser open. 2 officers stepped out. The one approaching the driver's side, Officer Vance Harlan, had a heavy, swaggering walk, his hand resting casually on the butt of his service weapon, an intimidation tactic as old as the badge itself. His partner, Officer Rowan Briggs, a younger, nervous-looking man, flanked the passenger side, shining a high-powered mag light directly into the car, sweeping the beam aggressively across the immaculate leather interior and finally blinding Victor with it. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Harlan demanded. There was no good evening, no sir, just a flat, authoritative bark. Victor squinted against the glaring beam of the flashlight. "Good evening, officers. May I ask why I was pulled over?" His voice was calm, resonant, and entirely devoid of the trembling deference Harlan was accustomed to hearing. Harlan leaned down, placing his forearms on the windowsill of the Mercedes, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Victor's. He smelled of stale coffee and peppermint gum. "I said license and registration. Do you have a hearing problem, buddy?" "I heard you perfectly," Victor replied, his gaze locked onto Harlan's eyes, not breaking contact. "But before I reach into my jacket or my glove compartment, I am legally entitled to know the reasonable, articulable suspicion for this traffic stop." Harlan's eyes narrowed. The smirk vanished, replaced by a rigid clench of his jaw. He hated the ones who used big words. "You were swerving back there, crossing the yellow line. Look like you might be operating this vehicle under the influence. Now, I'm not going to ask you a third time." It was a blatant lie. Victor's driving had been flawless, documented by the high-end dashcam recording, silently behind his rearview mirror. But Victor knew arguing the facts on the side of a dark road was a losing battle. "My license is in my wallet, which is in the inside left breast pocket of my suit jacket," Victor stated, his voice remaining perfectly level, enunciating every syllable. "My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for my wallet first. Is that understood?" "Just get it," Harlan snapped, taking a half step back, his hand gripping his weapon a fraction tighter. Moving with deliberate, exaggerated slowness, Victor used his right hand to reach inside his coat, extracting a slim leather wallet. He pulled out his driver's license and handed it through the window. He then leaned over, opened the glove box, and retrieved the registration and insurance card, handing those over as well. Harlan snatched the documents. He did not even look at the name on the license yet. His focus was entirely on establishing dominance. He shone his own flashlight onto Victor's face. "Where are you coming from tonight?" "Work," Victor answered simply. "Work?" Harlan scoffed, his eyes raking over the luxurious dashboard, the tailored suit, and finally back to Victor's face. "What kind of work keeps you out until this hour? And whose car is this? You borrow it from your boss?" "The vehicle is registered in my name, as you can see on the registration," Victor replied, his tone chillingly polite. "And my place of employment is frankly none of your concern. Officer Harlan, is it? Badge number 8442? Harlan's face flushed red in the freezing air. The casual recitation of his badge number felt like a physical strike. "All right, wise guy. Step out of the vehicle." "I decline," Victor said, his hands returning to the steering wheel. "You have my documents. You claim I was swerving. Write the citation if you feel it is warranted, and I will be on my way. You have no legal basis to order me out of the vehicle under these circumstances." Pennsylvania versus. "Mims says I can order you out of this car for any reason I damn well please," Harlan barked, stepping closer, his voice rising in volume. "Now pop the door and step out, or I will drag you out." Victor knew the case law perfectly. He knew Harlan was technically right about the authority to order a driver out during a lawful stop, even if the stop itself was based on a fabricated pretext. The events unfolded rapidly. "Very well," Victor said quietly. "I am stepping out of the vehicle. I am unarmed and I am not resisting." He unbuckled his seatbelt with slow, deliberate movements. He pulled the door handle, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped out into the freezing drizzle. He stood to his full height, 6'2", towering over Officer Harlan by a good 3 inches. The size difference seemed to momentarily throw Harlan off balance, prompting him to instantly escalate his aggression to compensate. "Turn around. Face the car. Hands on the roof," Harlan ordered, unhooking his handcuffs from his belt. Victor complied. He placed his hands flat against the cold, wet metal of the Mercedes roof. He spread his legs as ordered. Officer Briggs, having rounded the back of the car, stepped up right behind him. "Are you detaining me?" Victor asked, speaking to the metal of his car. "Shut up," Harlan hissed, beginning a highly aggressive rough pat-down. He jammed his hands up Victor's legs, patted down his sides with unnecessary force, and patted the pockets of his expensive wool overcoat. "You got any weapons on you? Needles? Anything that's going to stick me?" "I am unarmed. I have not consented to a search of my person or my vehicle," Victor stated, his voice ringing out clearly into the night, ensuring the cruiser's dash cam audio would pick it up. "I don't need your consent," Harlan sneered. "Briggs, run his plates, get his background. Let's see what warrants this guy is hiding." Briggs grabbed the license and registration from Harlan and jogged back to the cruiser. Meanwhile, Harlan forcefully grabbed Victor's left arm, wrenching it behind his back. What are you doing? Victor demanded, his voice hardening for the first time. I have complied with every lawful order. You have no cause to place me in restraints. Officer safety? Harlan grunted, snapping the cold steel cuff onto Victor's left wrist, then grabbing his right and securing it tight. Too tight. The metal bit into Victor's skin. You're acting squirrely, makes me nervous. Victor stood there handcuffed in the freezing rain, leaning against his own car. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, compartmentalizing the humiliation, the anger, and the profound, exhausting reality of the situation. It did not matter what suit he wore. It did not matter what he drove. In the dark, on the side of the road, he was just a target to a man with a badge and a superiority complex. Headlights washed over them as a heavy Ford Explorer SUV, marked with police decals, roared onto the scene, parking at a sharp angle to block the road entirely. The doors swung open and Sergeant Desmond Hayes stepped out. Hayes was a veteran, a thick-necked, red-faced man who ran his shift like a tyrant. He had trained Harlan. He had molded him. "What do we got, Harlan?" Hayes asked, his boots crunching on the wet asphalt as he approached, his eyes instantly locking onto the handcuffed black man. "Caught him swerving on the highway, Sarge. Refused to answer questions. Got combative. Refused to exit the vehicle initially." Harlan lied effortlessly, his chest puffing out slightly in the presence of his superior. "Car smells like weed." Victor's eyes snapped open. "That is a blatant fabrication. I was absolutely compliant. I was not swerving, and there is absolutely no odor of marijuana in this vehicle." "You speak when spoken to," Hayes roared, stepping directly into Victor's personal space, pointing a thick, calloused finger at Victor's nose. "You think because you got a nice suit, you can give my guys a hard time? I've dealt with 100 punks like you." "Sergeant," Victor said, his voice dropping an octave, radiating an absolute chilling authority that made Hayes pause for a fraction of a second. "I strongly advise you to check the dash cam footage of my vehicle and your own officers. I am explicitly denying consent to search my car. Any attempt to do so based on a fabricated odor of marijuana will be a direct violation of my Fourth Amendment rights." Hayes laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Fourth Amendment. Listen to Johnny Cochran here. Hey, Briggs," Hayes yelled back to the cruiser. "Harlan smells weed. We got probable cause. Toss the car." "Sarge, you sure?" Briggs called back, looking up from the glowing screen of his onboard computer. He looked pale. He was still waiting for the slow, outdated local system to process the national database query on the driver's license. System is lagging on his background. "I said toss it," Hayes commanded. Harlan grinned, pulling on a pair of black latex gloves. He opened the driver's side door of the immaculate Mercedes and began tearing it apart. He threw the custom floor mats onto the wet road. He ripped through the center console, tossing pristine charging cables, breath mints, and sunglasses onto the passenger seat. He opened the glove compartment and let the owner's manual spill onto the floor. Victor watched from the corner of his eye, the cold rain soaking through his suit, his wrists throbbing. He did not say a word. He did not need to. The trap had been set. The bait had been taken, and the officers were currently burying themselves under the weight of their own hubris. Harlan moved to the back seat. He grabbed a heavy, locked leather briefcase sitting on the leather upholstery. He hauled it out into the rain and set it on the trunk of the car right next to where Victor was handcuffed. "What's in the briefcase, buddy?" Harlan asked, tapping it with his flashlight. "Lots of cash. Maybe some contraband." "That briefcase contains legally privileged, confidential documents," Victor stated flatly. "If you attempt to open it, you are committing a federal offense." "Federal offense?" Hayes mocked, leaning against the side of the car, crossing his arms. Oh, I'm shaking in my boots. Open it, Harlan. If it's locked, break the latch. Harlan pulled a heavy folding knife from his pocket, preparing to jam it into the brass lock of the briefcase. Back in the police cruiser, the computer finally chimed. A massive wall of text flooded Officer Briggs's screen. A bright red banner flashed across the top. Restricted access. Federal clearance required. Briggs blinked. He squinted at the screen, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead despite the cold. He looked at the name on the driver's license he was holding, then back to the screen. Name: Victor Anthony Kane. Status: Active Executive Branch. Title: United States Attorney, Eastern District. Special Directives. Lead Counsel, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division Task Force, Police Integrity. Briggs's stomach plummeted into his boots. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost illuminated by the harsh laptop screen. His hands began to shake violently. He reached for the cruiser's radio microphone, fumbled it, and nearly dropped it on the floorboards. "Sarge?" Briggs croaked out the window. His voice cracked. He sounded like a terrified child. "What is it, Briggs? We're busy here." Hayes snapped over his shoulder, watching Harlan struggle with the briefcase lock. "Sarge, you need to come look at this right now." Hayes let out an irritated sigh. "Keep an eye on him, Harlan," he muttered, trudging heavily back to the cruiser. He leaned his head through the passenger window. "This better be good, kid. Did he have warrants or what?" Briggs did not speak. He just pointed a trembling finger at the glowing screen. Hayes squinted at the text. It took him a few seconds to process the bureaucratic jargon. Then his eyes hit the title United States Attorney and below it, DOJ Civil Rights Division, Police Integrity. The silence that fell over Sergeant Hayes was absolute. The blustering, arrogant swagger vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, paralyzing terror that started in his chest and radiated out to his fingertips. He slowly lifted his head, looking through the rain-streaked windshield at the man handcuffed against the Mercedes. Victor Kane was not just a lawyer. He was the newly appointed, ruthless federal prosecutor sent straight from Washington, D.C. He was the man currently leading a massive, heavily publicized federal probe into systemic corruption, racial profiling, and civil rights violations within this exact police department, specifically the 12th Precinct, Hayes's precinct. Hayes felt the bile rise in his throat. He looked at the scene he had just authorized. An illegal stop, an illegal detainment, a fabricated charge of marijuana odor, an illegal search of a vehicle, and Harlan was currently trying to break into a locked briefcase containing undoubtedly confidential federal investigation documents pertaining to them. "Harlan." Hayes's voice was a strangled, high-pitched gasp. It did not sound like him at all. "Harlan, stop. Put the knife away." Harlan, startled by the panic in his sergeant's voice, paused, the blade inches from the leather. "What? Sarge? I almost got it." "I said put it away!" Hayes screamed, sprinting out of the cruiser and closing the distance in 3 frantic strides. He shoved Harlan away from the briefcase so hard the younger officer stumbled and nearly fell onto the wet asphalt. Hayes turned to Victor. The sergeant's face was chalk white. His hands were hovering in the air, trembling, unsure of what to do with them. "Mr. Kane." "Sir?" "United States Attorney Kane," Hayes stammered, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a pathetic, desperate rush. Victor slowly turned his head. The rain dripped from his eyelashes. His expression remained utterly impassive, a terrifying monument of calm amidst their sudden hurricane of panic. "You've run my license, Sergeant Hayes," Victor said, his voice quiet, slicing through the rain. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding," Hayes babbled, his hands practically shaking as he reached out toward Victor's back, trying to figure out how to undo the handcuffs without actually touching him. Harlan, get the keys. Get the keys right now. Uncuff the U.S. attorney. Harlan froze, the knife still in his hand, his brain failing to process the words. The what? Get the keys and take the cuffs off him now, you idiot. Hayes roared, raw fear cracking his voice. Harlan dropped the knife. It clattered against the pavement. He fumbled frantically at his belt, his fingers clumsy, dropping his key ring twice before finally finding the small handcuff key. He rushed forward, his hands shaking so badly he struggled to find the keyhole on the steel restraints binding Victor's wrists. "Sir, please," Harlan whispered, his voice trembling as the lock finally clicked and the steel jaws opened. "We didn't know. We thought you were swerving, sir, I swear." Victor slowly brought his arms forward, rubbing his wrists where the tight metal had left deep red welts. He did not look at Harlan. He turned fully to face Sergeant Hayes, who looked like a man standing on the gallows trapdoor. "You thought I was just another black man you could humiliate on the side of the road," Victor said, his tone conversational, yet carrying the weight of a judge passing down a life sentence. "You thought you could fabricate probable cause. You thought you could illegally search my vehicle and break into a federal privilege briefcase." "Mr. Kane, sir, please," Hayes pleaded, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "We can fix this. I'll personally pay for the detail of the car. We'll wipe the CAD report. This never happened. Please, sir, I have a wife. I have a pension in a few years." The begging had begun, and Victor Kane, looking at the terrified men who moments ago felt like gods of the highway, knew exactly how this story was going to end. The rain seemed to fall harder, washing over the flashing red and blue lights, casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. The silence that had descended upon the side of Elmwood Drive was heavier than the humid night air. "Wipe the CAD report?" Victor repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the sound of the storm like a blade. He adjusted his damp suit jacket, his eyes locked onto Sergeant Hayes. "You are suggesting we destroy official police dispatch records, Sergeant. You are offering a federal prosecutor a bribe in the form of detailing my vehicle to cover up a string of civil rights violations." Hayes swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pale gray. "No, sir. No, that's not what I meant. I just meant we can handle this internally. There's no need to escalate. We made a mistake. A massive, terrible mistake." "A mistake is writing down the wrong license plate number," Victor corrected, taking a deliberate step forward. The three officers flinched as if he had drawn a weapon. What happened here tonight was not a mistake. It was a textbook execution of systemic profiling. Officer Harlan initiated a pretextual stop based on a fabricated traffic violation. He then escalated a nonviolent, compliant encounter by illegally ordering me out of the vehicle and placing me in restraints without reasonable articulable suspicion of a crime, nor any justifiable concern for officer safety. Officer Harlan, still holding the handcuffs, looked like a man who had just woken up from a severe concussion. "Sir, I thought I smelled marijuana. I swear." Victor turned his piercing gaze to the younger officer. "Did you? Because the dash cam audio from your cruiser will reflect that you claimed I was swerving and acting squirrely. Sergeant Hayes is the one who suggested tossing the car, and you eagerly complied. You manufactured probable cause to conduct an illegal search, and then—" Victor pointed a long, steady finger at the leather briefcase resting on his trunk. "You attempted to force entry into a locked container holding classified Department of Justice materials. Do you have any idea what the mandatory minimum sentence is for tampering with federal evidence and obstructing a federal investigation?" Harlan's knees physically buckled. He had to lean against the slick trunk of the Mercedes to keep from collapsing. "God," he breathed, the reality of his actions finally crushing his bravado. "Oh my God." "Sir, please listen to me," Hayes begged, taking a half step forward, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "I have 20 years on the force. 20 years. If this goes on paper, I lose my pension. I lose my family's health insurance. My daughter is starting college soon. Please, mister." "Kane, have a heart. We were just doing our jobs." "Doing your jobs?" Victor's voice finally rose, the sheer indignation breaking through his icy exterior. "Your job is to protect and serve the citizens of this community. Instead, you operate like a state-sanctioned street gang. You prey on those you deem vulnerable. Tonight, you simply picked the wrong prey." In the background, Officer Briggs was still standing frozen by the cruiser's open door, the glow of the laptop illuminating his terror-stricken face. He had not spoken a word since he read the screen. He was watching his entire career evaporate before it had even truly begun. "Officer Briggs," Victor called out, not taking his eyes off Hayes. Briggs jumped, nearly hitting his head on the door frame. "Yes, sir." "Is your dash cam currently recording?" "Yes, sir. Audio and video, continuous loop," Briggs stammered. "Excellent," Victor said smoothly. "Sergeant Hayes, I want you to use your radio right now. I want you to contact dispatch and request that Captain Garrett Sterling report to this exact location immediately." Hayes balked, calling the precinct captain to the scene of a botched, highly illegal traffic stop involving a U.S. attorney was career suicide. "Sir, Captain Sterling is at home. He's off duty. We don't need to wake him. You will call Captain Sterling, or my next phone call will be to the director of the FBI to report an active kidnapping and assault by armed men impersonating lawful authorities," Victor stated, pulling his sleek, water-resistant smartphone from his interior pocket. "Make the call, Sergeant." Now defeated, broken, and trembling, Hayes slowly reached for the heavy radio mic clipped to his shoulder. He pressed the button, his thumb shaking so violently he double-clicked it. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Adam. I need Captain Sterling at my 1020, Code 3. Tell him it's an emergency involving the U.S. attorney." The radio crackled with static for a long, agonizing moment before the dispatcher replied, confusion evident in her voice. 10-4, 4 Adam. Contacting Captain Sterling now. The trap had closed. The officers were pinned like insects on a display board, waiting for the heavy hand of their own command to come crashing down. It took some time for Captain Garrett Sterling to arrive. Unlike the patrol vehicles, Sterling's unmarked black Tahoe did not use sirens. It simply glided out of the fog, its strobe lights flashing silently, and parked nose to nose with Hayes's Explorer. Sterling, a tall, impeccably groomed man in his late 50s, stepped out into the rain, wearing a dark trench coat over a hastily thrown-on suit. He took one look at the scene. The U.S. Attorney standing by his torn-apart luxury sedan, the three officers huddled together, looking like men awaiting execution, and let out a slow, heavy sigh. Sterling had been briefed on Victor Kane. The entire command staff had. They knew a federal hurricane was hitting the 12th precinct, investigating years of alleged civil rights abuses, excessive force complaints, and racial profiling. Sterling had explicitly ordered his men to be on their best behavior, to operate strictly by the book. Clearly, they had not listened. Sterling bypassed his men entirely and walked straight toward Victor, extending a hand. "Mr. Kane, I am Captain Sterling. I cannot express how profoundly sorry I am for this situation. Are you injured?" Victor did not take the offered hand. He looked at it for a moment, then met Sterling's eyes. "I am uninjured, Captain, though I cannot say the same for my constitutional rights, my vehicle, or the integrity of your precinct." Sterling slowly lowered his hand, his jaw tightening. "Sir, I assure you, this is not reflective of the department as a whole. These men made a catastrophic error in judgment. I will personally see to it that they face severe internal discipline, suspensions, mandatory retraining." "Retraining," Victor interrupted, a humorless smile playing on his lips. "Captain, I don't think you grasp the gravity of the situation. This is not a matter for internal affairs. This is a federal crime scene." Sterling's eyes darted to the scratched leather briefcase sitting on the trunk, then down to the pocket knife lying abandoned on the wet asphalt. He closed his eyes, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "What did they do?" "Officer Harlan," Victor gestured to the trembling cop, "illegally detained me, placed me in handcuffs without cause, and at the direction of Sergeant Hayes, conducted an illegal search of my vehicle based on the fabricated odor of narcotics. When they found my locked briefcase, Officer Harlan produced that knife and was attempting to pry it open when Officer Briggs finally managed to read my credentials." Sterling turned to his men. The look of pure, unadulterated fury on his face made Hayes take a physical step backward. "Is this true?" Sterling roared, his voice competing with a sudden crack of thunder. "Did you attempt to force open a federal official's locked property during an illegal stop?" "Captain, we didn't know who he was," Harlan blurted out, tears of panic finally mixing with the rain on his cheeks. "He was driving a $100,000 car. He was out past midnight. He fit the profile." The silence that followed was deafening. Harlan had just said the quiet part out loud. He had just confessed on camera and in front of his captain and a federal prosecutor to explicit racial profiling. Victor chuckled, a dark, hollow sound. "He fit the profile. Thank you, Officer Harlan. You just made my job infinitely easier." Victor turned back to the briefcase. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small brass key, and inserted it into the lock. It clicked open smoothly. He popped the latches and flipped the lid back. Inside, meticulously organized in red and blue folders, were hundreds of pages of documents. "Captain Sterling," Victor said, his voice echoing in the wet night. "Do you know why I was working so late tonight? Do you know why I was driving through your jurisdiction?" Sterling did not answer. He was staring at the folders, a sense of impending doom washing over him. "I am the lead counsel for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division task force," Victor declared. "For months, my team has been building a RICO case against the 12th Precinct. We have documented systemic corruption, evidence planting, and a disturbing pattern of unconstitutional traffic stops, specifically targeting minorities." Victor reached into the briefcase and pulled out a thick blue folder. He held it up in the rain. "Tonight, I stayed late to finalize the federal indictments. We are unsealing them soon. I was taking them home to review them one last time before submitting them to the federal judge." Victor walked slowly toward Sergeant Hayes and Officer Harlan. He stopped inches from them, holding the folder out. "The irony, Sergeant Hayes," Victor whispered, leaning in so only the officers and the captain could hear the devastating truth, "is that this folder contains a detailed indictment with your name on it. It details your involvement in the beating of an unarmed teenager years ago and the subsequent cover-up. And underneath your name," Victor shifted his gaze to the weeping Officer Harlan, "is yours for perjury and falsifying police reports on dozens of traffic stops." Hayes collapsed. His legs simply gave out, and he fell to his knees on the wet asphalt, his head bowed, sobbing into his hands. The hard karma had arrived, not by coincidence, but by the sheer, arrogant magnetism of their own corruption. They had pulled over the exact man who held the keys to their destruction, carrying the very documents that would send them to federal prison. "You didn't just pull over a black man tonight, gentlemen," Victor said coldly, stepping back from the kneeling sergeant. You pulled over your own executioner. Victor turned to Captain Sterling, who was staring in horror at his men. Captain, relieve them of their weapons and their badges right now, because if you don't, I will have the FBI SWAT team at your precinct soon to do it for you. Sterling did not hesitate. He walked over to the weeping Hayes and the paralyzed Harlan. Stand up, he ordered, his voice devoid of any sympathy. Give me your belts. Give me your badges. You're done. The heavy, relentless rain felt like a physical weight pressing down on the asphalt, washing away the last remnants of the patrolman's arrogance. The precinct captain stood over his two disgraced men, his hand outstretched, palm facing upward in a silent, uncompromising demand. The sergeant, a man who had spent decades ruling his suburban jurisdiction with an iron fist, was trembling so violently he could barely unbuckle his leather duty belt. The harsh glare of the cruiser's headlights illuminated the tears streaming down his face, mixing with the freezing drizzle. He let the heavy belt, burdened with the Glock, the taser, and the extra magazines, drop to the wet pavement with a sickening thud. He then reached up with shaking fingers, unpinned the silver shield from his chest, and placed it into the captain's waiting hand. The aggressive patrolman beside him was entirely catatonic. The reality of the RICO indictment, the realization that he had just illegally detained and attempted to rob the lead prosecutor of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, had completely short-circuited his brain. The captain had to physically reach forward, unclip the patrolman's weapon, and tear the badge from his uniform. You are both suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending federal charges. The captain growled, stepping back in disgust. You will not return to the precinct. You will not speak to anyone in the department. You will wait for the FBI to knock on your doors. Victor stood by his Mercedes, his posture immaculate despite the soaked wool of his suit. He watched the dismantling of their authority with cold, analytical detachment. He did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He simply closed his leather briefcase, locked it with a definitive click, and placed it safely back into the rear seat of his vehicle. "Officer Briggs," Victor called out, his voice slicing through the sound of the storm. The young rookie, who had remained paralyzed by the cruiser, flinched as if struck. "Yes, sir. You did not initiate the stop. You did not participate in the illegal search of my vehicle, and you were the one who accurately ran my credentials," Victor stated, his tone professional yet laced with a subtle warning. "Soon, you will report to the federal building downtown. You will give a full, unredacted, sworn statement regarding everything you witnessed tonight and everything you have witnessed during your time under this command. If you do this, you will be treated as a cooperating witness. If you do not, you will be added to the indictment as a co-conspirator. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," the rookie stammered, nodding frantically. "I'll be there, sir, I swear." Victor turned back to the captain. "I expect a tow truck for the debris they left on the street, and I will be driving myself home. I suggest you get your house in order, Captain. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day." Without another word, Victor slid into the driver's seat of the Mercedes, started the engine, and merged back onto the dark highway, leaving the flashing lights and broken men in his rearview mirror. The hard karma did not wait long to deliver its final blow. The following morning, a fleet of unmarked matte black armored SUVs surrounded the 12th precinct. Dozens of heavily armed FBI tactical agents wearing olive drab tactical gear with FBI emblazoned in stark yellow letters across their backs swarmed the building. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision. Inside the precinct, the morning shift was just filtering in, sipping coffee and complaining about the weather. The heavy glass double doors were shattered by a battering ram, and the lobby was instantly flooded with federal agents. "Federal agents, hands in the air, step away from your desks," the tactical commander roared, the sound echoing off the linoleum floors. The raid was swift and merciless. Agents seized servers, locked down the evidence room, and began cordoning off file cabinets. But the true spectacle was happening out in the affluent suburbs. Simultaneous arrest warrants were executed at the homes of numerous officers, including the disgraced sergeant and his patrolmen. Neighbors, who had long assumed the heavy police presence in their cul-de-sacs was a sign of safety, peeked through their blinds in shock as federal agents dragged the men out in handcuffs. There was no professional courtesy. There was no quiet surrender. They were perp-walked across their pristine lawns in their pajamas, shoved into the back of federal transport vans, and stripped of the dignity they had so casually stolen from countless others. The rookie, true to his word, sat in an interrogation room at the federal building, poring over hours of dash cam footage and squad room audio recordings with federal investigators. He detailed the quotas, the fabricated contempt of cop charges, and the systemic racial profiling that was implicitly encouraged by the precinct's leadership. The house of cards was collapsing, and the foundation it was built on had been completely pulverized by the very man they had tried to intimidate on a dark, rainy highway. The federal courthouse in downtown Oak Ridge was not merely a building. It was a staggering monolith of cold granite, white marble, and heavily polished mahogany. Its very architecture was explicitly designed to make anyone who walked through its towering, brass-handled doors feel acutely aware of their own insignificance in the face of the United States justice system. On this crisp, unusually bright afternoon, months after the fateful rain-soaked traffic stop on a dark suburban highway, Courtroom 4B was suffocatingly full. The air inside the massive chamber was thick, practically humming with the nervous, vibrating tension of 100 held breaths. Every single wooden bench in the gallery was packed to absolute capacity. The room was a sea of murmuring reporters scribbling frantically on legal pads, seasoned civil rights advocates who had fought for decades for this very moment, and most importantly, the stoic, tear-streaked faces of the victims' families. These were the citizens who had been terrorized, framed, and marginalized by the men currently sitting at the defense table. They had waited years, enduring the suffocating weight of systemic injustice, to see the scales finally balance. At the defense table, the physical and psychological transformation of the accused was nothing short of staggering. The former officers of the 12th Precinct, specifically the veteran sergeant, who had spent decades ruling his shift through intimidation, and the aggressive patrolman who had so eagerly acted as his heavy-handed enforcer were entirely unrecognizable from the men they had been on the highway. The intimidating, swaggering bulk of their dark blue uniforms, the heavy-duty belts that held their weapons, and the silver shields that had served as their psychological armor, were all gone. In their place were the humiliating, ill-fitting, tan canvas jumpsuits of the federal penal system. They looked completely hollowed out. Their skin was a sickly, pallid gray, drained of life after months held in federal lockup without the possibility of bail. The sergeant, once a man whose very shout could clear a city block, now stared blankly at the polished grain of the defense table. His hands, resting on the wood, carried a permanent, uncontrollable tremor, a nervous tic he had developed within weeks of his arrest. The patrolman sat rigidly beside him, his bloodshot eyes darting frantically around the cavernous room, still seemingly unable to comprehend how rapidly and violently his entire reality had disintegrated. At the prosecutor's table, U.S. Attorney Victor Kane sat in stark, commanding contrast. He was meticulously dressed in a deeply tailored charcoal pinstripe suit, his posture immaculate, his demeanor radiating the exact same profound, terrifying calm he had exhibited while handcuffed in the freezing rain. He methodically organized a stack of manila folders, his face a mask of absolute analytical detachment. The heavy wooden door behind the bench swung open, and the bailiff's voice rang out, shattering the low hum of the gallery. All rise. Judge Robert Patterson, a notoriously strict federal judge with a legendary zero-tolerance reputation for public corruption and civil rights abuses, took his seat. His stern, unyielding gaze swept over the courtroom, lingering for a heavy, suffocating moment on the defense table before nodding toward the prosecution. Mr. Kane, Judge Patterson announced, his voice booming over the courtroom's amplification system, echoing off the high marble walls. You may proceed with your closing statement. Victor slowly buttoned his suit jacket. He stepped out from behind the heavy oak table and walked with deliberate, measured steps toward the center of the room, stopping directly in front of the jury box. The courtroom fell into an utterly profound silence. Even the scratching of the reporter's pen ceased. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Victor began, his voice resonant, carrying effortlessly to the furthest corners of the gallery. For years, the men sitting right over there at that defense table operated under a dangerous, deeply intoxicating delusion. They firmly believed that the badge they wore upon their chests was not a solemn shield meant to protect the public, but rather a blunt weapon forged to subjugate them. They believed in their supreme arrogance that they were the law itself rather than its humble servants. He paused, letting the silence stretch, before turning his body to point a single, unwavering finger directly at the former sergeant and the patrolman. Both men visibly flinched under the weight of his gesture. They deliberately preyed on the most vulnerable members of our society, Victor continued, his tone hardening, each word striking like a hammer. They fabricated evidence to cover their own tracks. They destroyed livelihoods, fractured families, and shattered lives over nothing more than bruised egos and bigoted assumptions. They operated a criminal enterprise funded by taxpayer dollars, believing that because of the color of a person's skin or the zip code they happened to live in, they could strip citizens of their constitutional rights with absolute, unquestioned impunity. Victor turned away from the jury and walked slowly back to his table. He reached down and picked up a deeply scratched, battered leather briefcase, the very same briefcase from that rainy night on Elmwood Drive. He carried it to the center podium and set it down with a heavy, definitive thud. But absolute arrogance, Victor said softly, his gaze locking intensely onto the defendants, has a unique, almost poetic way of completely blinding those who wield it. On a freezing, rain-swept night, these men initiated an illegal, pretextual traffic stop based purely on their own racial profiling. They illegally detained a compliant citizen. They attempted an unconstitutional search of a vehicle, and in their ultimate hubris, they attempted to force their way into this exact federally protected briefcase. Victor rested his hands on the leather. They thought they were simply terrorizing just another black man on a lonely road. They thought they had found a target they could easily intimidate in silence. Victor's voice rose, filling the room with undeniable authority. They had absolutely no idea that in their blind arrogance, they had just detained the lead federal prosecutor sent from Washington to completely dismantle their criminal enterprise. They handed us the final, irrefutable pieces of evidence we needed to end their reign of terror. At the defense table, the patrolman finally broke. He buried his face in his trembling hands, a ragged, ugly sob tearing from his throat, echoing loudly in the quiet courtroom. The sergeant squeezed his eyes tightly shut, his jaw trembling uncontrollably, as a single devastating tear rolled down his pale cheek under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, the Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law, and the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The evidence presented before you in this courtroom has been overwhelming, meticulous, and entirely undeniable, Victor concluded, stepping back and looking into the eyes of each juror. These men abused the sacred power granted to them by the people. Now they must answer to the people. We ask that you find the defendants guilty on all counts. The jury deliberations were swift, signaling that there was absolutely no doubt in their minds. When the jury filed back into the box, the tension in the room was physically painful. The foreperson, a stern-looking woman in a gray cardigan, stood up, the slip of paper shaking slightly in her hands as she read the verdict aloud into the microphone. Guilty on every single count: conspiracy to deprive civil rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated perjury, obstruction of a federal investigation, racketeering. With every guilty that rang out, the defendants sank lower into their chairs, the last fragile remnants of their hope evaporating into the sterile courtroom air. The hard karma had officially hit back, striking with a devastating surgical precision they could have never anticipated. Judge Patterson did not mince his words during the immediate sentencing phase. Leaning far over the elevated bench, he stared down at the broken, weeping men, his expression one of pure, unadulterated disdain. "You took a sacred oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States," Judge Patterson spat, his voice trembling with righteous anger. "And instead, you treated it like a piece of garbage beneath your boots. You have permanently damaged the public trust in this city. You have made the jobs of honest, hard-working police officers infinitely more dangerous by your selfish, bigoted actions. For your roles as the architects and enforcers of this deep-seated corruption, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. This sentence is to be served consecutively without the possibility of parole." The sound of the judge's heavy wooden gavel hitting the sounding block cracked through the air like a gunshot, signaling the absolute end. The federal bailiff stepped forward instantly, grabbing the former cops by the arms and hauling them roughly to their feet. As they were forcibly turned around, the bailiffs pulled their arms behind their backs. The harsh, metallic ratcheting click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping around their wrists sounded perfectly, hauntingly identical to the cuffs they had so eagerly and unjustifiably snapped onto Victor's wrists all those months ago. They were marched out of the courtroom, shuffling in their canvas shoes, their heads bowed in total disgrace. They were walking toward a lifetime locked inside a concrete cage, destined to be surrounded by the very populations they had spent their entire careers unjustly persecuting and tormenting. The unchecked power they had so gleefully abused was gone forever, replaced by the cold, unforgiving, and permanent reality of their own ruin. Victor watched them disappear through the heavy brass-handled wooden doors. The gallery erupted into a mixture of applause, exhausted tears, and quiet prayers of relief. He did not smile. He calmly gathered his legal pads, placed his pens meticulously back into his pocket, and secured the documents inside his battered leather briefcase. With the quiet satisfaction of a man who had seen a difficult, necessary job through to its absolute end, he turned and walked out of the courtroom. Stepping out of the shadows of the courthouse and into the bright, warm afternoon sun, the scales of justice finally definitively balanced. This story serves as a chilling reminder that absolute arrogance often leads to absolute ruin. And the scales of justice have a remarkable, sometimes poetic, way of balancing themselves. When those sworn to protect use their power to terrorize, they inevitably set the trap for their own destruction. Hard karma does not always announce its arrival, but when it hits, it strikes with devastating precision, proving that no badge can shield you from the consequences of your own corruption.